Hey guys, so I thought instead of just posting a game, I might talk a little bit about a game and sort of thought processes through it. Um, this is the Lichess analysis board, and it provides a couple helpful things. It gives you potential lines that the computer thinks is good, a local evaluation of what the computer thinks is good. These, of course, are the moves in the game. An analysis based on the computer scores, like which bad moves there were, inaccuracies, mistakes, and blunders are sort of like small to bad mistakes made in the game. And then the graph down here shows um, the computer evaluation over the course of the game. So for each half move, what the computer thought the advantage was. So positive is for white, like white is a little better in this case, and negative is for black. So minus zero point 0.2 is better for black. The magnitude of that score is the basically rated in pawns. So like +1 is one pawn. Um, +3 would be like essentially three pawns, or roughly what a piece, like what a bishop or knight is worth. +3 is typically a winning advantage with like good play, um, but it all depends on the position. The computer can think that one side is better or worse than the other, but it just depends on how a person plays. Sometimes you'll see big swings in the evaluation, like one player will blunder, and then the other player will essentially blunder back that advantage, and it will be like almost even again. Those are typically like missed tactics. Sometimes you'll see when the evaluation has a big spike in it. So this is a correspondence game I played on here, 1 day per move, but typically, in these time controls, people are making around 10 or more moves per day. So these types of games may take 2 to 3 days to play. And I typically have 9 or 10 of these going at a time. So I don't spend a lot of time on each position necessarily in each game. Um, it's just sort of to play for fun and like try to like get some interesting positions and learn a little bit about how you're playing. So as white, I typically go e4. This is one of the two standard openings, e4. Oh, excuse me, e4 or d4. Um, d5 is typical reply. Oh, and also these arrows. So the dark arrow is what the computer thinks the best move is. The lighter arrows are like alternative moves, and you'll see the evaluation for each of those moves here. So here, yeah, typical developing. You want to control the center with some pawns and get your pieces out, and also get castled. So you see with these first three moves, I put a pawn in the middle, try to control some squares in the middle of the board. I develop my knight, also controlling some squares in the middle of the board, and then I develop my bishop with the idea to castle on the next move, depending on what black does. So black immediately harasses the bishop, so I need to move the bishop. Here I'm okay just taking the knight. Typically the knights or the bishops are a little bit more valuable than the knights, but he has this disadvantage that his pawn structure is a little bit damaged now, taking away from the center like this. It does open up his bishop to get developed, which I sort of counter by not allowing him to pin the knight to the queen. So you see these are all, the evaluation through here is pretty evenish. These are fairly typical openings. I was attacking this pawn, so he defends it with his bishop with the idea to then develop the knight and get castled. I protect my pawn here with the idea to develop the pieces on the queen side now. The knight comes in. I want to try to like maybe harass this pawn, so I'm developing this knight with the idea to jump like into this square and then have two pieces attacking this pawn, which becomes awkward for him to defend. He has to make another move to defend that pawn. So he decides to instead sort of launch an attack against my king side by launching these pawns down the board. This sort of signals that he's probably not thinking about castling. He wants to keep this rook behind this pawn, and eventually maybe launch these other pawns and try to get down here and open up the king side where my king is intending to castle. So I sort of ignore that and just jump in with a knight, attacking, again, this pawn twice. So here he doesn't defend it, right? So I'm basically like, I can take. If he recaptures, then I can take. So I win a pawn here. These pawns in the middle of the board are kind of valuable too, given like he already has this sort of damaged pawn structure with these pawns doubled up. I'm going to win this pawn in the center, and hopefully have some like advancing chances with these pawns. So I take. He doesn't really bother to take back. Since it doesn't matter, we can just trade these pieces. But I was going to win that pawn anyway, so it doesn't really make sense maybe to capture here. He's sort of valuing this bishop over this knight in the middle here. The knight doesn't really have any good forward moves at this point. These are all, the squares are pretty much covered. So I would have to retreat or go somewhere. Essentially, I have one retreating square as well here. And I'm not bothering to castle at this point because I can castle at any time. And also, since he started to launch these pawns in the king side, I'm also thinking like maybe castling queen side is better. It's looking like given he's advanced this pawn, he's not intending to castle king side either. He's probably intending to go queen side. So this is sort of the game that's being played, is like you're trying to figure out what your opponent is doing. You're trying to get your pieces onto good squares. And here I'm pinning his knight to his queen just to kind of harass him a little bit here. It's not super easy for him to get out of that pin. So now he decides to take my knight. I take back. And then rather sort of clever move. He's got an attack here. I don't really want to drop the bishop back, although that's what the computer thinks is the best move. This maybe is a good move. He's basically going to win this pawn, but I don't really mind that too much, because where is his king going to go, right? He's already sort of said he doesn't want to go this way, which he's sort of committed now to going this way. And him evacuating one of these pawns here means I'm going to have an open file against his king with a rook. So, and I'm up a pawn, so I'm essentially giving back a little material. This is sort of this could be bad for him though, opening this up this way. So I essentially block the check. He decides to take the pawn, and I decide his queen here is pretty evasive. He was attacking this pawn. There's no great way for me to defend it. And I don't really want to invite like to recapture with the king maybe if I would move the queen here. So here I'm inviting a queen trade. I think that's probably fine in this position. I have some other ideas here with maybe taking out this knight, doubling these pawns, and then going after these weaknesses. He declines the queen trade, which I think is a good idea. He's also attacking this pawn, and he's attacking the knight now. So if I move the knight, he gets this pawn. If I move, if I go here, he can just take the knight with the bishop, and then take the pawn with the queen, so he wins another pawn there. So I decide to defend with the bishop. This gives him an opportunity to harass the bishop with another pawn, which I'm fine dropping this bishop back. He's nice and safe over here. And the knight is still defended, and this pawn is still defended. So I castled. He decides to castle. His queenside castle brings another attacker to this pawn here. I decide to just castle. He's not probably. He can win. if he decides to take this pawn, I'll retake with a knight. Then he retakes with the queen. The rooks are worth more than the knight is, so he's not really threatening to take here yet. He decides to continue this attack on the queen side, but I can kind of ignore this because I mean, if he decides to take here, I can just recapture, hide my king in the corner, bring this rook to the open file, and then get to the back rank this way. So it's not such a detriment if he decides to like capture here. This file where the rook is will still be closed. So I'm really not so worried about that. And his queen is over here on this open file, so the computer's suggesting this move, which I think is the move I made. Oh no, I decided to just actually close it up, not let him capture here at all. So these pawns are sort of stopped. He can't really easily attack this pawn. This pawn can't advance, and if he advances this pawn, I can just take it. So that threat is sort of parried, and here, yeah, he decides to get his knight to a better post, and I decide, I don't really want this guy just. He's now attacking this knight twice. I don't really want this guy just sitting out here, or to try to defend it. So we just decided to trade those guys, and then I can start to just push these pawns to sort of defend the multiple attacks here. And it's kind of interesting, the computer's calling for this move. It's a very active queen post, but your queen is sort of not really coordinating with anything yet in that position. Not sure what that rook move was about. Maybe he's thinking to start pushing these pawns and try to go more for a kingside attack. But now I can do some things to harass his queen here. So I push this pawn to, sort of stops these pawns from advancing and attacks his queen. So he has to do something with his queen. He decides to put it here, which is an active post again, but queen is sort of running out of squares and not coordinating with the other pieces very well. So he decides to launch these pawns on the king side, but now his pieces are awkward. These rooks are not communicating. I have like some attacking chances here, so I decided to open up things in the center a little bit. Not always making the best move, but like creating some threats. So, I'm looking to defend this pawn, but get a more active post for the queen. Also, now that the rooks are connected, I can look to move one of them and harass his queen. The computer's calling for him to double up here and go after f2, which is only defended by the king right now. He decides to drop back and get his pieces coordinated. Now you can see I'm starting to get my pieces coordinated on c7 here, which is a weak spot in his camp. The computer's calling to get the queen here, which is immediately a threatening mate. I decide to get my rook in here and then potentially double rooks and try to do some damage on this open file. So now, yeah, you can also see I'm threatening to take here with check. These two pieces are coordinating. So he has to parry that threat somehow. He decides to block with the bishop. And I sort of have ideas to, maybe get another piece in the action here on this square. So I am sort of maneuvering my queen around. He decides to attack the queen. He doesn't really want me sneaking in here because then I might be threatening mate on the back rank. This one. So he decides to attack the queen, and then now I can sort of start to coordinate a little better. So you'll see I have this battery. This is threatening mate, and I'm also defending here, right? He doesn't really have any other way to defend this pawn. His queen is sort of out of the action. The computer is calling now for some pretty dangerous moves here. You can see the advantage is plus 9.5. This is basically a huge winning advantage. This is just sacrificing material. This is what the computer will do when you're losing. It just wants to try to continue the game on in any way possible. So, pushing this pawn I would just capture the pawn, and I still have the same threat alive, which is mate on c7 here. So this is actually the final position in the game. My opponent resigned. He didn't really have any way to counter. I could kind of show you if he pushes here, I just take. Then of course, the computer just wants to give up the queen now. Take. But this is completely losing for black. I basically have the queen for the bishop in this case, and I think the pawn count is I'm up a pawn as well. But you can see basically the evaluation goes from about a pawn up. There were some chances here where he had to sort of equalize, and once he decided to drop his rook back, he wasn't defending the 7th rank anymore. So getting pieces on the 7th rank safely, your threat, and especially with threats of check and mate, are usually pretty dangerous. So after this point, I felt like I had a pretty good advantage, even though I didn't make the best move here. Queen into here is actually the best move, but this is a decent move too. And then this final queen maneuver, threatening mate. There's really no, if he just does anything right, I have mate right there. That's end game over. So, yeah, not a super strategic game. Just sort of one move threats in a lot of cases, but kind of interesting to review your games in this manner, figure out where you could improve according to the computer, and maybe where your opponent could have improved as well. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it.